The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, I'm Kevin Scully, and this is The People's View. I'm here today with Christopher Maidment, who's an educational activist and somebody I think that New Hampshire should get to know a little bit better. Welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm sitting in for Carl Seidel, and he gave me the opportunity of doing two programs and picking my guests to bring on here. And I had two names in mind, and I had a show last week with Jess Cream from the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. And you also was a person who I thought was a really interesting person doing some very important things that basically nobody knows about, and perhaps they've never even heard of you. So I was hoping to give you the opportunity to present a little more of who you are and what you're doing, because I think you're doing some very good and important things for the state of New Hampshire.
Well, thank you. I was honored to be asked, and I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, well, let me read a little bit of your political bio. You are the board member for the Get Involved PAC.
Yep.
You're a corresponding secretary for the Hillsborough County Republican Committee. You're a founding member of the Granite Staters for Education Reform. You were the campaign manager for Chris Ager, who had a stunning upset victory to become our national committee man. And you're currently working with Elliot Axelman as his campaign manager for his run for the House of Representatives.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
See, I get tired just reading that list. That's just some of the things you do. But you know what I'd love? Let's start with a little bit about you, who you are, your background, where you came from, and.
Yeah, sure. Well, like many, I'm a political refugee from Massachusetts who moved up to New Hampshire to escape, Taxachusetts, I call it. And that's one of the nicer names.
But I refer to it as the People's Republic. So.
That works too. I lived there the first 20 years of my life. I moved to New Hampshire in 2010 for the first time. Bounced around a little bit, bought a house in Manchester, sold the house in Manchester, and then met my fiance in 2015. Mm-hmm. She was just finishing up her senior year at Roanoke College in Roanoke, Virginia. She was just starting her senior year, I'm sorry. So I moved down to Virginia with her for a year, and I missed New Hampshire immediately. They charged me right off the bat, $1,500 sales tax for a truck I bought in New Hampshire.
Wow.
And then they wanted to charge me an excise tax on all the tools I owned for my construction business, and I said, we are getting out of here as soon as you graduate. We weren't sure where we were going. By the end of the senior year, it turns out that she was pregnant with my oldest son, Finnegan, who's now 2.5. Wow. So we said, okay, we'll go home to New England because we need the support network. Mm-hmm. So we came back to New Hampshire, and we've been here since 2017 now. So on and off, I've lived here for 9 years.
Okay. And you have your own business?
Yeah, a small construction company, CJM Construction. We do interior remodeling, kitchens, bathrooms, decks, mostly that kind of work.
Now, I have to tell you, I know how tough it is to be a small businessman and how time-consuming it is, and yet here you are doing all of these other activities of political activism, and so I have to ask, why did you decide to go the extra step and to try to do these things?
I guess it's not really a short story, so we probably don't have the time for the whole thing, but I was really, it comes down to President Trump. In 2016, he was this new kind of candidate who was spurring all this political engagement among young people. And I think that's one of his, I don't want to give him all the credit, but, whether he meant to or not, he inspired a lot of people to get involved in the process and to follow the process. And what he was able to do as an outsider really opened my eyes to, it's not this old boys club that you can't break into. You don't have to know everybody. It helps. You don't have to have I guess he had $1 billion, but, so that really, seeing the political engagement among young people, like I said, we lived almost on campus at Roanoke College at the time. And the day after the election, they canceled classes and they brought in therapy dogs. Honest to God. And like, I mean, I knew that kind of stuff was going on college campuses, I guess, but I never really saw it up close and personal until then. And I was like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, if these 21-year-olds, 20-year-olds can be active in the political process, then so can I. So that's when I really got interested in politics. I didn't know anything.
Right.
I was a keyboard warrior that was speaking to an echo chamber pretty much, or I was just getting muted by a lot of my friends.
Right.
I think I'm still muted from a lot of my friends, but that's fine.
It's tough to tell, right?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. And then, so I found a class put on by Americans for Prosperity, New Hampshire.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The Grassroots Leadership Academy. And we had a 6-week-old baby, and my wife hadn't been out of the house in 6 weeks. And I came home from work, and we were supposed to go to this class, and I said, I'm tired, I don't want to go. And she looked at me and she said, we're going.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, we're going. So we went, and it was a great group of people. There was about 30 people. We brought the 6-week-old baby, and immediately we were at home. These people thought like us. Politically, we were on the same page. So we got to know all of those people a lot better, and some of my best friends I met in that class now.
Right.
And that's how I started getting really involved.
I see. Okay, yeah, it is interesting because I was fairly late to political activism, but once you get into it, there's a whole nother society and culture that's there. And I have to tell you, I've made some of my best friends and closest friends through getting involved in political activism as well.
Yeah, once you trip into that rabbit hole, it's a long way down, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm still not ready to climb out yet, so I mean, I guess you aren't either. So it's interesting because I was hoping you might talk a little bit about the Granite Staters for Education reform. I think one of the ways you would classify yourself is as an educational activist. Can you really talk to us about that, why that's so important to you and what you're trying to do in that area?
Yeah, so I'm a father now. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old. So I started looking at their future. And my wife and I have been talking about how we're going to educate them. Are they going to go to public school? Are they going to go to private school? Are we going to homeschool? And we started to look at all of the options out there, of which there are many. New Hampshire has like 30 public charter schools on top of the traditional public schools. There's private religious schools, there's private secular schools, there's homeschools, there's homeschool groups. So there were a lot of options, and I started looking at all these and started to look into the laws around it because I'm kind of a policy wonk, I would say. I can read an RSA and decipher it. And I started looking at the bills that were going on in Concord. And some of the programs that help, disadvantaged students or whatever were starting to get dismantled, or they were trying to dismantle them. And so I said, well, I'm going to learn more about this. So I started reading the news about education issues, and there seemed to be this big void of support for education reform or education opportunities. And, particularly from our 2 candidates for governor on the Democrat side right now, they spend an awful lot of time in the newspaper attacking some of the great stuff the Department of Education is doing,
right,
and attacking Governor Sununu for it, and attacking Commissioner Frank Edelblue. Right. So I didn't see a lot of support for the stuff that they were doing. I just saw a bunch of attacks on the stuff they were doing. So I talked to a bunch of people that have been active in education before, for example, John DePietro from Manchester, Kate Baker. I talked to Victoria Sullivan, who spent 2 terms in the House. I talked to, Kevin Verville and, Glenn Cordelli. And all of these people are doing such great things to support education and education opportunities, especially Kate Baker runs the Children's Scholarship Fund New Hampshire.
Right.
So these people are doing the real work, but nobody had their back in public. So I said, I've been writing a lot lately. Why don't I start writing about this issue and show some support for the great work being done on the education front and providing opportunities for our students.
Right. It's interesting because from my perspective, I've come to believe as a conservative that the biggest mistake the conservative movement ever made was surrendering the educational process to the progressives in this country. basically surrendering it without a shot. And I heard it was a wonderful expression once. It said, if you send your children to be educated in Rome, don't be surprised if they come back as Romans.
Right. That's a good line.
And I think, so maybe you could speak to that issue.
Yeah. So, I mean, growing up, that's all I heard was Democrats care about kids. Democrats care about education. Democrats do this, Democrats do that, and Republicans hate kids, and Republicans want to defund schools, and Republicans want to, they're evil, and but that's the furthest thing from the truth, especially now. We see, for example, this charter school grant. So for a little background, Maggie Hassan in 2016 or 2015 tried to get this. There's federal grants to help expand and open charter schools, and you can use the money to open buildings or to, buy the materials, but you can't use it for ongoing curriculum. It's just to get the charter school started. It's startup money. It's seed money. And she tried to get it. She didn't get it. Governor Sununu came into office. He nominated Frank Edelblu, Commissioner of Education. After a contentious nominating in the Executive Council, he was sworn in, and immediately he set to work getting this charter school grant. And New Hampshire was awarded the largest one in the country.
Wow.
$46 million to expand or open new public charter schools. And that's an important note. Public charter schools. They are public schools. They are subject to the oversight of the Board of Education. There's a bunch of ways to open them. We can go over that in a second if you want. But this $46 million would be used to expand successful charter schools that already exist. For example, the Virtual Learning Academy of Science, VLAX, it's all online. Or, there's one in Nashua, Academy of Science and Design, I think it is.
Yeah, I think number one in the state.
Number one public school in the state.
Yes.
Number one rated public school in the state is a public charter school. And these schools give opportunities to kids that aren't otherwise succeeding or aren't fitting in their public school. Maybe they're getting bullied. Maybe they're just not doing well with the curriculum. And there's these opportunities for them to succeed and get an education. So I was like, well, $46 million, that's great. $10 million the first year, $10 million the second year, on and on for 5 years.
Goes a long way in a little state.
It goes a long way in a little state like this. So it was going to open 20 brand new ones, replicate 7, or expand 7 and replicate 5, or somewhere along those lines. I'm not particularly sure off the top of my head, sorry. So I was like, well, this is a no-brainer. And then it went in front of the Joint Legislative Fiscal Committee, and the 7 Democrats on the Joint Legislative Fiscal Committee shot it down, killed it. They said, nope, we're not taking the money. And they cited some crap reasons about how it's going to cost $100 million for taxpayers and blah, 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 blah. After, what they say about traditional public schools all the time, we need to properly fund them. We need to raise taxes to properly fund traditional public schools. But no, we're not taking free money. I say free. We all know it's not free.
Yes.
We're going to take money from the federal government to open new opportunities and new innovative ideas for these kids. They said no. So it was like, whew.
Well, it's like the educational industrial complex strikes back, right?
Yeah.
And they want to keep everything under their control, a one-stop shop where you have no choice and you have to stay there and be under their control and basically have the unions running the show.
Well, that's what it's all. The teachers' unions and their lobbies lobby these legislators, and they lobby their school boards, and no progress can be made because they want or have such a tight-fisted control over the traditional public school system.
Right.
And it really gets in the way of education, which should be the primary focus of schooling.
And then the teachers' unions fund the campaigns for the Democrat politicians. And the old saying is, you take the king's shilling, you are the king's man, right? So I think we're seeing that in this case here. And it's really sad. I mean, well, it's kind of laid bare to anybody who's paying attention now where the true priorities are.
Yeah, the masks are completely off.
Right.
They're not even pretending to care about the kids anymore. And it's shocking almost how dug in they are on the issue. It's Governor Sununu and the Commissioner of Education keep bringing the grant up to the Fiscal Committee. It's been in front of them 4 times,
right,
and it'll probably be in front of them a 5th time this month. And they're nothing's changed.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but they voted to table. They didn't even wouldn't even have a discussion on this, would they?
They voted to table the first time.
Yeah.
In January, they voted to kill it. In February, it got brought back, and they voted to table it again.
So they're not even allowing people to come up and talk about the benefits of bringing this money in and what it can do for the children of New Hampshire.
Not that I've seen. They did have a discussion in January, I believe. I wasn't there that day, but that's when they cited all these, it's going to cost $100 million to the taxpayers. It takes money out of traditional public schools, which is nonsense. Because anybody who knows how education funding works is there's a chunk that's swept statewide education property tax, and then there's a chunk that's local property tax. And the public charter school students only get money from SWEPT, the statewide education property tax. So it doesn't drain any money from the traditional public school students.
Actually, from that perspective, it means that there's more money to spend on the children who stay in the traditional schools, isn't it, in terms of, because the money's not being given over to the charter schools.
Right. Well, the average cost per pupil is $19,000 or more now in the statewide New Hampshire. And the average is $5,200 of that comes from SWEPT. So if a student leaves, the $5,200 goes with them.
But they get
but the $14,000 stays where it is.
For an empty seat, which they can spend distributed among the other children that remain.
And if you look at a school budget, a traditional public school budget, most of it is for buildings, administrators, school buses, transportation, electricity, cable, magazines. Very little of it is spent on teacher salaries, and there's a lot of benefits that teachers get. But the big chunk of it is we're paying for buildings. And we're not paying for education. We're paying for buildings, we're paying for transportation, we're paying for food.
Well, here in Nashua, we're building a new middle school, and they're bonding. They are making improvements to two existing ones. They're building yet another one in the face of decreasing enrollment. And it's going to be, all told, there's going to be another $170 million of cost to the taxpayers.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it played out over and over again. And it's a real shame because you could, if you're a scientist, as I am, you could make the case that there's an inverse relationship with the amount of money you throw into the public school system and the performance of the kids.
Well, it's not really an inverse, but if you look at the results over the past 20 years, in New Hampshire, we've tripled spending on traditional public schools, tripled. Enrollment has steeply declined. But if you look at the results, the measurable results, so these are proficiency tests that we give, they're flat.
Wow.
Flat.
Wow.
Haven't changed in 20 years. They bump up, they bump down, but on average, they're flat, stagnant. So lower enrollment, higher costs, and flat results. It just seems like common sense to anybody that, we've got to try something new.
Yes.
This is the education model we've been using for over 150 years. If we took a teacher from 1850 and plopped him or her in a classroom today, they would have absolutely no problem teaching the curriculum. Yeah, sure, there's smart boards and laptops, and you put all that stuff away, the material is still the same. We're still teaching the same way. We're still, so we've got to look at this and we've got to find the opportunities. Like these charter schools, the public charter schools, are these real innovative solutions. They all do things differently. They're run by their principals and administrators, which are, they keep expenses tight because they have to. Because they get, I believe it's $7,200 out of the SWEPT per student. That's it. That's it from taxpayer dollars. And then they're all 501c3s in New Hampshire. So they can get private donations. And I think the average public charter school spends about $9,500 per pupil.
Wow, less than half.
Less than half of what a traditional public school spends per pupil. We don't know if they get, not everybody takes the measurable proficiency tests, but a lot of the schools have a higher proportion of low-income students, a higher proportion of, minority students. They get a higher proportion of special education students. They get a higher proportion of trouble students, that these students that aren't doing well in their traditional public schools, so they go to a public charter school. So it's hard to measure results apples to apples because it's really apples to oranges.
Right.
But the cost is half. But it's not really about the cost, right?
No, it's not.
If these education opportunities are working,
Right. I don't think people would be complaining if, in response to the increased spending, we were seeing increased proficiency.
yeah.
But
we're not.
But we're not.
In the traditional public schools, we're just not seeing it.
so I think it's very reasonable for people to ask questions and say, you know something, maybe there should be more than one way. And I think it's wonderful that you got involved in this. Although it must be very frustrating at times because you've got a big, organized block of people who are trying to keep you from being able to do this.
Yeah, you got to have thick skin. A lot of times we're just trying to move the ball forward a foot, a yard. Eventually, we'll get a first down, hopefully. But you move the ball one step at a time, and if we can move the ball forward a little bit, then we'll be succeeding.
Okay. Now, how about your Get Involved pack? If you want to talk to that, how did that come about? I understand that are you on the board?
I'm on the board now.
Yeah.
Get Involved pack was around long before I got involved in politics. The basic premise is the Get Involved pack recruits, trains, and supports Liberty candidates.
Okay.
Nonpartisan pack. Mostly it ends up being Republicans. There was a Democrat that the Get Involved pack supported a few years back. But yeah, that's our goal. I mean, you served in the House.
Yes.
There's 400 seats to fill.
Right.
So recruiting is really an all hands on deck approach. The NHGOP does some, 603 Alliance does some, and then we do a bunch at the Get Involved pack. The county committees do it. So from the Get Involved pack standpoint, we look at empty seats and we try to recruit a good liberty-minded representative from that district to step up and run.
Yeah, it seems from me you're running up against almost a cultural or mindset problem in that most conservatives do not consider government to be the answer, and they're not looking for government to basically step in and run their lives. So those people are usually fairly competent, they're taking care of their own business, and they just want to be left alone, and they will thrive on their own.
Well, they want to live free or die, right?
Right, exactly.
When we moved back to New Hampshire, we bought 19 acres out in Peterborough so that we would be left alone, we would have privacy, we wouldn't be bothered by the government, and then I said, okay, I'm just going to go poke the government, I guess. So, but most people just want to, they go to work, they want to put food on the table, they want to take care of their kids, they want to educate their kids, they want to, live prosperous lives and not be interfered. They don't want government interfering with their lives. They want to be left alone, like you said.
But we're up against a group of people who think that government is the answer.
Yes.
And they're attracted to the levers of power. And they want to get in there to do that because they're sure they can make everybody's lives better if they only get a chance to tell them what to do.
Right. The paradigm split couldn't be more clear, right?
Yes.
So getting conservatives and liberty-oriented people to be in the government, it's almost a contradiction in itself.
It is.
Because,
it's like a paradox. I mean,
pretty much everybody accepts that there has to be a government.
Yes.
The Constitution lays out what the federal government's powers are. We've gotten way away from that. The state constitution lays out what the state powers are. And we've gotten away from that a bit too.
Certainly with this current legislature, I mean, my God.
The things they're trying to do.
Yes, they're trying to do.
So that helps. Actually, this has been one of the easier years to
good.
recruit.
Wonderful.
Because we have Governor Sununu, thank heavens, who's in the corner office. And then we have a Democrat majority in the Executive Council, the Senate, and the House. And they have passed some wild bills.
Dangerous bills.
Dangerous bills. 11-day waiting periods for firearms they passed. They called it 7 days, but weekends, holidays weren't included. It could have been up to 11. They passed, plastic bag bans. They wanted to allow towns to regulate plastic bags. All the
Driver's
gun control.
license for illegal aliens.
Driver's license. And, one of the biggest ones is they passed an honest-to-God income tax.
Oh, yes, I know.
A tax on payroll for New Hampshire employees to fund family medical leave.
Yeah.
When there was an voluntary plan put forth by the governor, there's a voluntary plan sitting on their left side, and on the right side they're saying, no, we're going to go with an income tax instead. That makes more sense.
Oh, when I was up in the legislature, we had a privately funded approach that would give them exactly what they wanted, and they voted against it because that's not what it's all about. It's that income tax that they really want, and this is the camel's nose underneath the tent.
And you mentioned earlier I'm the campaign manager for Elliot Axelman in Hooksett right now.
Yes.
Citizens Count, I'm sure you're familiar with them. They do surveys of candidates. On her survey, she indicated she would 100% support an income tax in the state of New Hampshire.
This is Elliot's opponent.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's what we're up against. That's what conservatives in the state are up against. So if conservatives don't want to get involved because you want the government to leave you alone, I got news for you. If you don't get involved, the government's going to come for you.
Right. I think Don Gorman, who was a really brilliant man, a multi-term state rep, and who put on a training course for new state reps, and I took that, he said, you may not be interested in government, but government is interested in you.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't put it better myself.
Yeah, and well, he's a smart guy. And that was the point he was making, which is you can't just hope you can close your door and pull down your blinds and they won't come for you or do something to affect your lives, because they sure will.
They will. They will.
So you need to get out there and do something about it. I have to tell you, I was so encouraged by the turnout that Donald Trump had in the primary. We had basically 120,000 people.
More than that, I think.
Showed up in an uncontested primary to vote for him. I think there's a lot of motivated people out there. And I'm sure you're telling your potential candidates that too. There's going to be a big turnout to support the president. We're hoping if we can convince them to come down, ticket, and vote for folks, we can take the House and the Senate and the Executive Council back.
In 2010, we had a supermajority in the House. If you remember, Bill O'Brien was elected Speaker.
Yes. Yep.
Was able to cut the New Hampshire state budget 18% because we were facing $1 billion deficit.
Right.
And he was able to put the state back on track.
Right. I'm
with
hoping we can
veto-proof majority in the House.
We can keep it that way. It's funny. I was thinking about slogans, and of course we do have "Live Free or Die." I also I think I'm going to be using "Live Free and Thrive" because I think if we can do that and continue to keep the government working for us instead of it telling us what to do, we will thrive as a community and as a state.
Couldn't agree more.
So I'm so happy that you came here today to talk to us about who you are and what you're doing. Good luck with your future, and I'll see you out there on the campaign trail.
Thanks again for having me.
Okay.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.